Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today for the kickoff of our 2025 lecture series. January is always a tough month, but we have great weather. Unfortunately, we have playoffs going on, so I think that may have cut our crowd down a little bit.
Bills are ahead.
I noticed that, yeah. I wasn't going to mention it, didn't want to offend anybody. But as always, let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Just to go over a couple of things before we introduce our guest. If you didn't notice on the way in and you weren't at our open house in December, you'll see two historic markers on our rail cart. These were produced, very nice, Vanna. These were produced through the auspice of some mitigation money that Hecate Energy was required to provide to several of the historic groups in the town as a result of the solar power project on 101 Under Cliffs Road. With that money, we had these two signs produced. The Ravenna Yard sign will be the first historic marker in the incorporated village of Ravenna. None were placed there in the 1930s. The second is for the alcove and Indian Fields, which was inundated as part of the construction of the alcove in the 1920s. That, other than some signs that Alcove Historical Society has had produced for several important sites in the Hamlet Weir, will be one of the first ones. Those few that Alcove Historical Society has produced, and this will be the first signs that have really been put up in Queens in almost 100 years. The first groups being in the 1930s as part of the Works program. But these will certainly be much more accurate than most of them are. We're glad that our partners up in Alcove have led the way on this, and we actually may have one more to announce hopefully in the next few months. So take a look at those on your way out. It also shows the proposed locations. If you're not a member, please stop and grab a membership card on your way out. We love adding new members to the organization. And just to go over our upcoming talks, on February 9th, we're going to be welcoming Zach Klaus and his dad, Pete Klaus, who many of you know. Zach is a videographer for Channel 13 News, but also has been a documentarian producing short films for the past couple of years. He previewed his documentary Herman here a couple of years ago, which went on to win a few awards regarding World War II. Zach's second production, which is in consultation and cooperation with his dad's research, will follow the events and the efforts of James Scalzo, who is their uncle, on the date of September 16, 1944. It deals with the Army Corps of Engineers and a particular battle that occurred in Germany, and the life-saving efforts of James Scalzo and one other serviceman who was killed in that battle. So based on the research that Zach does, and I know the extensive research Peter has done, they've gone across the country and Europe and gathered information. We're very excited that they'll be here next month to hopefully show some of that film and also talk about the extensive research they've done that's going into producing that documentary. On March 9th, we're welcoming back Dick Muggio. For those of you who may have been here when Dick did his talk on Dutch brewing, which included beverages from rail to trail, which I don't think we're going to be able to recreate this time, but maybe we'll still have beer here for him to come back at. He's going to be talking about the ice industry, which isn't here anymore, it's behind it. We have a panel of ice industry tools somewhere back here. And Dick is going to come and talk about the ice industry in Greene County, which obviously Queens and Greene County shared industries. So it'll be exciting to hear Dick's talk. As you know, he's very engaging. So we look forward to bringing Dick back to talk about an industry that really I don't think many of us have a lot of, we have a lot of folklore about how it was handled, but I think learning the actual effort that went into quarrying blocks of ice and storing them and transporting them, and the extensive use and importance this area upstate had in terms of producing ice for downstate, for the city, is a great story. We look forward to Dick being here in March. we should be able to give you a good chunk of the rest of the schedule as the next couple of months go on. With that, I am pleased to welcome back Ron Gabriele. I hope you had a much easier time finding us.
Oh, came like an arrow, boy. No, didn't get picked up, didn't get arrested.
This time.
That lady came back, I got lost and I asked the lady directions. And when the Albany County Sheriff's officer picked me up, that lady was nice enough to come back and say, "Sir, the man is not from here. He's giving a speech. He's lost. Would you please have consideration?" I guess that helped because he didn't give me a ticket.
So, Village of Ravine, the nicest place in the world.
Yes.
So we welcome Ron back. For those of you who heard his talk a few months ago on the Civil War widow who was married to General Longstreet and went on to be part of the B-29 project, was a great talk and certainly engaging. So we were very excited to ask Ron to come back to kick off our season this year. Ron is a graduate of the University at Albany with an MS and went on to, and his bachelor's is from SUNY Rockport. He taught and coached for many years in the Kingston School District, where he is honorifically part of their Hall of Fame for his extensive coaching. I believe it's swimming, correct?
Yes.
Many significant records in the council. He would go on to become the head of athletics for Columbia Green Community College, retiring in 2003. Delving into a kind of passion for history, began researching and writing and speaking on historic topics, which we are the beneficiary of that work. And with that, I'm going to welcome Ron back. Thank you, Ron, for joining us today.
Okay. John, thank you so much. I'd like to start this discussion. This is the history of Golden Age radio. Can you all hear me without this thing? Do you need to? I'm a little bit easier if I can move around without it, but you want it on?
Well, you can still move with it.
Okay, all right, I'll turn it on after I always start this speech by playing about 30 seconds of an old-time radio show. Curious to see if anybody remembers it. And then at the end, if I can remember it, after the speech is over, I'll give you another 30 seconds of another show. So I'll be curious to see how many remember this old-time radio show.
General Mills, makers of Cheerios, the oat cereal ready to eat, and Wheaties, breakfast of champions, presents the Lone Ranger. Of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty Io Silver, the Lone Ranger.
Anybody remember that? I had to take note of the gunshots there. That was produced out of Detroit, over station WXYZ. I'm way off the track here, and they somehow were able to manufacture gunshots that sounded realistic. This was one of the big problems with old-time radio. You'd have a very dramatic scene, people really into it, and then the woman is going to shoot the guy, whatever it's going to be, and it sounded like a box of tissues. It just ruined it. But that outfit, the Trendle Muir Company, they somehow were able, they never told anybody. They were able to produce the gunshots that sounded very realistic. Well, at any rate, the golden age of radio begins on Monday, November the 15th of 1926, when the National Broadcasting Company signs on the air. The golden age of radio comes to a close on Sunday, September the 30th of 1962, when the CBS radio network cancels the last two dramatic radio shows left on the air. The names of those shows were Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar, and Suspense. Now, the very first radio broadcast in history is made on Christmas Eve. I don't know how well you can see this, but we'll pass this around a little bit later. Made on Christmas Eve of 1906 from Brant Rock, Massachusetts. And that broadcast is made by this man, a Canadian inventor named Reginald Fessenden. On that Yuletide evening, Reginald Fessenden begins his broadcast by playing phonograph records of Christmas songs. We did have phonographs at that time, right? The old Victrolas. So he plays Christmas songs on the Victrola. Then he plays his violin. Then he sings some Christmas songs. And then he closes out the first ever broadcast in history by reading passages from the Bible pertaining to the Yuletide season. Now, Reginald Fessenden is one of the more amazing men you've never heard of. Later in life, he takes part in the invention of sonar. That's the ping, ping, ping device used on high seas to detect submarines and icebergs. Now, the Titanic disaster in April of 1912 gives added impetus to the growth of radio, while at the same time, more and more of these amateur ham radio operators are becoming active. And what that does is it kind of keeps the idea of radio in front of the public's eye. The final impetus for the full growth of radio as a broadcast medium to the public will be World War I. Because during the course of the Great War, Allied military commanders come to understand the absolute necessity of having wireless voice messaging as opposed to wireless telegraphy in order to effectively coordinate air and ground operations and naval and land operations. Now, at the same time that the war is raging, there are remarkable advances in vacuum tube technology. The earliest radio sets were these primitive little crystal sets that required headphones in order to hear the signal. I was giving this speech a few years ago to Esquitoc. Anybody know that historical group over in the Castleton area? And after the speech, someone was kind enough to bring me a family photograph of folks listening to their little crystal sets. But the crystal sets were very primitive, and they required earphones in order to hear this signal. Well, fairly quickly, the vacuum tube becomes the central component of all radio sets until the end of the 1950s and the end of something called the transistor. Okay? But you had to be a little bit careful with these vacuum tubes. Very sorry to say that on occasion, from time to time, an American housewife, while doing her house cleaning and listening to her favorite show, see, this is the beauty of radio. You could do other things while listening to your favorite programs. But unfortunately, from time to time, she got a little too fastidious, and she reaches into the open back of her giant radio set to polish off the tops of those vacuum tubes with a damp rag, and promptly electrocutes herself. By 1920, radio is ready to burst onto the American scene. August 20th, 1920, the very first radio news broadcast is conducted over experimental station 8MK out of Detroit. And then comes Tuesday, November the 2nd, 1920. Now this is the seminal date in radio history. And by the way, it was election day in America. Warren Harding was elected president. But on November the 2nd of 1920, the very first commercial radio broadcasting station signs on the air. Would anybody know the call letters of this very significant station? Here's a hint. It's not WGY. WGY is the first station in New York State, but not nationally. Anybody know the call letters? If you would say KDKA in Pittsburgh, you would be correct. And at 104 years and counting, KDKA in Pittsburgh is going stronger than ever. Wow. Now, my mom often talked about growing up in a very poor immigrant Italian family in the Pinkaki section of Kingston. Now, Pinkaki would be located down near the Hudson River. I see some people shaking their heads down by the mushroom caves there in Kingston. Mom had 6 brothers, my 6 uncles, and 1 sister. Grandpa Ambrose, Felix Ambrose, was a very poor man. He was a gardener for a wealthy woman, a Mrs. Corts, C-O-R-D-T-S. She was the wife of a state senator at that time. She had a big estate, and Grandpa was a gardener there. But as poor as the family was, Grandpa Ambrose understood my mother's great love for radio. This stuff must be genetic. And so he manages to scrape together the few pennies necessary to purchase for her one of those primitive little crystal radio sets. So she said every night after supper, as they called it then, the family would gather around in the parlor, as they called it then, and they would read, chat, or snooze. Think about it. There's no TV, there's no radio yet really to speak of. What else could you do but read, chat, or snooze? Okay? And she said she took her little primitive crystal set and she went over in the corner every night and she tried to pick up the signal of that great station, KDKA. And night after night, she couldn't get it. Well, finally comes the night when she picks up KDKA. In terrific excitement, she rips off her headphones, she jumps into the center of the room proclaiming, "I've got KDKA! I've got KDKA!" Grandpa Ambrose, bless his soul, fresh off the boat from Italy, with great anxiety in his voice, says, Catherine, keep your voice down. They'll hear you on the other end." By 1922, then, the first of the entertainment programs are coming on the air. March 10th, 1922, the great newspaper of the entertainment industry. Anybody know the name? Variety. Has a headline that screams, "Radio sweeping the nation. Over 1 million sets in use." Now, this is very significant on a couple of levels. Number one, at that time, folks, we don't even have 100 million Americans. Nothing like the 340 million we have today, holy mackerel. But so the percentage of growth here is pretty tremendous. And on another level, it's not even 2 years since KDKA came on the air. So America is buying into this new medium. And what this new medium is doing is breaking the great hush. Marconi, of course, gets credit for the invention of radio. His daughter, Degna, D-E-G-N-A, Degna Marconi, years later would comment on her dad. And she would say, "Until my dad came along, the world was engulfed in the great hush." There was nothing in the ether. I mean, what could you, if you wanted any sort of entertainment, you had to leave the house. You had to go to the theater to see a play, or they did have movies, but silent movies. I mean, the great hush is broken by this new medium radio. The first Rose Bowl broadcast will be held on January 1st, 1923, over radio station KHJ out of Los Angeles. Now, I'd like to take a few moments here and discuss how is it that these radio stations got the various call signs that they use right down to this day. As early as 1912, and you talk about far-sightedness, the first commercial radio station doesn't come on the air until 1920, KDKA. Mind you, in 1912, an international conference is held, and it's entitled International Radio Telegraphs. 8 years before commercial radio debuts. At this conference, all the nations in attendance are awarded the first letter that must be used in the call signal of every station in the respective nation. So, for instance, Britain. Britain is awarded the B. Every radio station in Britain must begin its call sign with the B, such as the famous
BBC.
BBC.
Yeah, BBC. France is awarded the F. Every radio station in France must begin its call sign with the F. Canada gets the
C.
Mexico gets the
M.
See, I tricked you. I'm ashamed of myself. Mexico got the X. All radio stations in Mexico begin their call sign with the X. Now, that might seem strange, but help me out here. I can only think of one other nation on planet Earth with an X, Luxembourg. Am I missing anything? So Mexico got the X. We, the United States, folks, we get 4 letters. We get the A and the N, we get the W and the K. Now quickly, the A and the N are reserved for emergency and broadcast frequencies. The W and the K are reserved for commercial radio broadcasting stations. And so, for the next several years, right up until 1928, as new radio stations come on the air, they're pretty much free to pick and choose whether or not they want to start their sign with a W or a K. Right up until 1928. In 1928, the Federal Radio Commission, or the FRC, which would be the predecessor to today's dreadful FCC, okay, makes 2 significant rulings. The first one makes some sense, the second one makes absolutely no sense. On ruling number 1, the FRC states that from this date forward, all new radio stations coming on the air west of the Mississippi River must begin their call sign with the K.
K.
Okay. And from this date forward, all new stations coming on the air east of the Mississippi must begin their call sign with the
W.
Okay. However, they grandfather in existing stations stating all stations already on the air, if they so choose, may keep whatever call sign they have. And I'm here to tell you, I did 25 years in radio. I loved it. Mostly sports, some news. And I've learned 2 things about radio. Number 1, their call sign is gold. And that call sign is everything. Like WGY. You know what I mean? That means everything. That's their total identity. So you can bet your boots, nobody's given up their call sign. So those stations that were already on the air, you bet your boots, they kept the call sign they had. So it is that to this day, there are 11 stations west of the Mississippi that still begin their call sign with the W, and there are 10 east of the Mississippi that still begin their call sign with the K. I think, hit me with your best shot, but I think the most intriguing of the W stations out west just has to be, you ready? WACO in Waco, Texas. Pretty neat, huh? And the most famous of the K stations would be, back east, would have to be KDKA in Pittsburgh. Then they make a second rule. And they never explain the reason for this rule. But that's government. Government doesn't have to explain, right? You just do what government tells you. Ruling number 2, the FRC says that from this date forward, all new radio stations coming on the air are no longer free to pick and choose whether they want 3 or 4 letters in their call sign. From now on, all new stations must have 4 letters in their call sign. But they never tell us why. They never say why 3 letters are so bad. But it gets worse. So they grandfather in the existing 3-letter station, saying all 3-letter stations already on the air, if they so choose, they may keep their 3-letter designation. Well, of course. Boy, that's really like gold. There's never going to be any more 3-letter stations. You bet your boots they hung on to their 3-letter station. Well, okay, so then if 3 letters are so bad, why is the government allowing a plethora of stations around the nation to keep their 3-letter designation? No explanation. We have 2 3-letter stations in our reasonably near area. I almost said 3 because I'm thinking of Syracuse, but there are 2. Anybody able to name there are 2 3-letter stations fairly nearby? And I named one already. WGY, Schenectady first in the state. The other one is in New York City. Anybody know it? WOR. Okay. The one I was thinking of, where I almost said 3, Syracuse, but most of us wouldn't know it. WSYR in Syracuse. But basically, the station that we mostly know about is WGY. They come on the air February 21st, 1922 at 7:47 in the evening. The first announcer is a man named Colin Hager, Kolin. His first act is to tell the listening public, folks, here's what WGY means. The W stands for wireless. The G is the first letter in the name of the company that owns the station, and that would be
General
General
Electric.
Electric, GE, thank you. And the Y would be the last letter in the home city of Schenectady, WGY. Now, as you drive around the country, and if you're a bit of a radio buff, as I am, and if you drive your wife, like my poor wife of 59 years, I drive her nuts playing with the radio dial. Just when I get somewhere new, I got it. What can I get? I got to see what I can pick up. If you do that, and you're in a strange city, and you pick up a 3-letter station, of this much you can be sure. The station you're hearing will absolutely have had to come on the air sometime between 1920 and 1928. It can be no other way. Okay? Well, as I mentioned then, it is the coming of the networks that brings about the golden age of radio. Okay, so first of all, what exactly is the golden age of radio? Very simply, the golden age of radio was radio being what television is today. Basically, every half hour, every hour, you got a different show. It might be a musical show, might be a comedy, might be a drama, a western, blah, blah, blah. But every half hour, every hour, just like television today. That's it. That was the golden age of radio. And oh, how we love that golden age. Now, it would take a large entity like a network to have the financial wherewithal to produce a 7-day-a-week broadcast schedule. No individual station would have that kind of money. Think about, I mean, these radio shows were pretty elaborately produced. You needed to have technicians. You needed sound effects people. You needed all sorts of industrial people like that. In addition to which, you need somebody to write script. You need to hire performers. I mean, there were huge expense. So in any individual radio station just could never afford it. But a conglomerate, like a network, they could afford to produce a 7-day-a-week schedule. So it all starts Monday, November the 15th, 1926, when NBC comes on the air. They will start with 17 radio stations across the nation, and they will grow exponentially. And NBC will call this first network the Red Network. 6 weeks later, NBC comes back with a second network, excuse me, and they will call this one the Blue Network, and it will have 5 stations to start with. Then comes January 21st, 1927, and on the air comes the Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS, and that marks the beginning of a daily tooth-and-nail head-butting struggle between NBC and CBS, and now a lot of other stations and networks. Every day, right now on television, they fight it out for every point in the Nielsen ratings, and hence every sponsor's dollar. The ratings, you live or die by your ratings. On radio, it was the C.E. Hooper Company, so on radio you lived and died by your Hoopers. On TV, you live and die by your Nielsen's. And I'm going to say here, I can't give an exact figure, but I'm going to guess at least 90% of the time when a show is canceled, it's because of the ratings. The higher your ratings are, your salesman can go out and sell the heck out of that show. Look, I got so many millions of people watching my show or listening to my show. And so you can charge top dollar. As your ratings go down, you can charge less and less. You're only able, we should say, to charge so much. Until, folks, you get to the point where you can't charge enough money to make a profit. You know, and that's, industry has to make a profit to survive. And so that is why so many of these shows get canceled, but the ratings. Occasionally, it's something else. Once in a while, a star performer gets too big for his or her britches. I think of Jag, one of my favorite shows. Love Jag. Anybody remember Jag on TV? And David James Elliott, he was great in the lead. Got to the point where I guess he thought he was going to, expand and be huge. And Belisario, Mr. Belisario, who owns NCIS, he said, after 10 seasons here, we didn't even negotiate with him. We didn't even try because we knew his demands were going to be outrageous. So the show is canceled, and David James Elliott never goes anywhere. So that, once in a while, that happens. But as a general rule, 9 times out of 10, it's the ratings that will kill your show. There were 4 major radio networks. We got 2 so far. The third of the big 4 is the Mutual Broadcasting System, MBS. Although I never really heard them referred to as MBS. Usually it's always Mutual. And radio historians kind of have always talked about Mutual as sort of a underdog network. And since that's the case, guess who loves them? I was, for all my life, a diehard Boston Red Sox fan. I mean, lived and died with the Red Sox. But guess what? You know who I rooted for very hard? The Washington Senators. And I gave this same speech in Coxsackie in November to the Greene County Historical Society. And when I said that, about rooting for the Senators, a lady in the audience yells out, "First in peace, first in war, last in the American League, Washington." So I've always loved the underdog. So I guess Mutual has always been my favorite network. Having said that, there's sort of a paradox here. Mutual will have 3 pluses in their history and 2 minuses. On the plus side, there will be times during the golden age when Mutual is the biggest of the 4 networks. Something pretty good for an underdog. That is, there will be times during the golden age when Mutual will have the most radio stations across the nation carrying Mutual programs. And the reason for that is, number 2 plus, Mutual will broadcast some of the most famous, some of the most beloved, and some of the longest lasting radio shows in history. Starting with no less than The Lone Ranger for most of its run. Later on, The Lone Ranger switches to ABC, but for most of its run, it's on Mutual. Also, The Shadow. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men. The Shadow is on Mutual for most of its run. But beyond that, Mutual carries a plethora of very famous shows, starting with Superman, Captain Midnight, Tom Mix and his Ralston Straight Shooters, Little Orphan Annie, Rin Tin Tin. I mean, the list just goes on and on. And the final plus, number 3, Mutual, in the early days, gets a big boost, a big jump on the sports audience. Mutual, during the summer months, Mutual will carry the Mutual baseball game of the day. Only during the weekdays, not on the weekends. Now, usually CBS or somebody had that, bought that package. But Mutual would take the weekday day games. And so, in those days, they played 154 games, much more reasonable than today, 162, and then 2 million years of playoffs. I can't hardly follow it anymore. But they would go from city to city. So, for instance, on a Tuesday, Mutual might be in Detroit at Briggs Stadium carrying the Tigers game. The next day, they might be up in Cleveland at Municipal Stadium carrying the Indians game. Day after that, they're in Chicago at Comiskey Park carrying the White Sox game. Next day, they're in Boston at Fenway Park carrying the Red Sox game. On and on and on and on. Now, why was that so important? Folks, remember what we're talking about here now. We're talking the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, at least the early part. And truly, Major League Baseball was the national pastime. I mean, some people are going to be hard-pressed to believe this, but the NFL, the NHL, and the NBA were sort of Bush League operation. Now, I'm 83. Anybody close to my age, I bet will pretty much agree with me, that if you rooted for those like NFL, people kind of looked at it like a little weird. And when I was a kid, the NHL had 6 teams. 6. That was it. And the top 4 went to the Stanley playoffs. I mean, it just wasn't there until December 28th of 1958. in the greatest game ever played. My Baltimore Colts beat the New York Giants in overtime to win the NFL championship. That single game boosted the NFL into the stratosphere like it is. Is that amazing? I mean, it just, now look at how many teams there are and so on. And today, probably, arguably, the NFL, holds prominence. Baseball, yeah. So those were the pluses for Mutual. On the negative side, as we get toward the downslope of the golden age, Mutual starts getting into financial trouble. And at one point, it gets so bad they have to reform themselves into something called the Don Lee Mutual Broadcasting System. And then finally, on the negative side, Mutual is the only radio network of the big four that never makes it into television. Think about it. NBC, CBS, and ABC will be the backbone. Again, anybody near my age, I would hope you would agree with me. Boom! Those three networks were the backbone of television. I don't know if TV could have survived without those networks in the early days. How many of you can remember WRGB? I'm going to hit you with something now. Ready? Channel 4. Originally they were Channel 4. Then switched to 6 because they were conflicting with Channel 4 out of New York City. I think it was WMBT, I think it was. Was it? Yeah. But they were somehow, I don't know, so they became 6. But that was it. We had one in Athens. I grew up in Athens. We had a little dinky antenna. They carried all the networks, Channel 6. They'd be carrying Ed Sullivan's show, which was broadcast Sunday night, on a Friday night. It was, but without those networks, I don't know if TV could have made it. But Mutual is never on board with that. When the golden age of radio dies, Mutual dies. The fourth of the big four networks, the American Broadcasting Company, ABC. ABC comes on the air in 1945 under circumstances that were difficult to understand then and now. So when he said that, you must automatically know government's involved. Yep. In the mid-1940s, government got it into its mind that NBC had a monopoly. Now, why did NBC have a monopoly? Well, they owned the red network and the blue network. But they never explained the fact that NBC had an arch competitor in CBS and a powerhouse in Mutual. Nope. And so in 1945, NBC is forced to divest itself of the blue network, and that's how ABC comes on the air. Now, with the coming of the networks comes the segmented broadcast day. I'm fishing for the words here because there's no official word. The best we can come up with is the segmented broadcast day. We have no evidence, we don't have anything exactly written down to tell you how did this come about. All we know is it came about. And what it was the networks, ultimately all four, more or less, will take the broadcast day and divide it into 4 pieces or 4 segments. And by crackers, wouldn't you believe, all 4 networks ultimately will broadcast similar programs in those segments. Okay? Now the segmented day begins at roughly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm going to have to qualify something here. The times that I'm giving you may or may not be exact. A lot of it depends on the market. I mean, we're talking across the nation here. The radio, the TV markets, they're vastly different, okay? So what's done in one market may not be done in another market. Folks, the stations, unless it was unless it was network owned. See, NBC, CBS, and ABC, they all owned some of their own stations. Mutual, by the way, never did. Mutual, again, another negative, they never owned any own stations. But if they owned it, right, if the NBC, say, owned WNBC in New York City or whatever, then by crackers, that station's going to put on everything the network puts on. But let's say WGY, that's independently owned. They don't have to put on every network program. They put on what is financially helpful to them. You know. Most of the time, frankly, most local stations carry most of the network. But they didn't have to. By the way, do you know how the radio programs were sent to the individual stations from headquarters in either New York City or Hollywood? They were sent over telephone lines. Over telephone lines. So if something ever happened on a telephone line, you know, you didn't get your broadcast that day. Okay, so the mornings are pretty much network free. From wake up until noontime or 1 o'clock, there's not a lot of network programming. There's some. The most famous would be on ABC, the Don McNeil Breakfast Club. On CBS, Arthur Godfrey Show. There'll be some, but not a lot, okay? Mostly in the mornings, the local stations were free to send their own salesmen out, sell the morning slots. I'm trying to remember on a GY as a kid. By the way, having been in radio all those years, we never pronounced the W. Inside radio, when you were talking, you always said GY or OR. You know, don't ask me why. But so they could send out, you know, their salesmen and sell slots. You did, by the way, you did get network news every half hour in the morning. That would come through, and most of the stations would use the network feed, and then have their local news as well. So that would be the morning situation. Now, starting at 1, we begin the segmented day. And again, I gotta go back. We have no evidence that the 4 networks got together and said, hey guys, let's do this. I mean, they're beating each other's brains out. We have a hard time believing they would ever cooperate in any way. But somehow, it evolves into this amazing thing. That's what I love about the history of radio, that sort of just fell like this. So at 1 o'clock, again depending on the market, until about 3:30, 4 o'clock, is the first segment of the broadcast day. Now, anybody know what kinds of programs the networks beamed on those, or during those hours? I'm sorry? Somebody said it. Soap operas. Okay, technically called, anybody know? Daytime serials. But they were called soap operas. Why were they called soap operas?
They sold soap.
Yes, thank you. Almost all those shows are sponsored by soap companies and detergent companies. Now, folks, for every one of these 4 segments, the network has a rationale. Here's rationale number 1. I'm growing up in Athens, just to give you an example. The network says that in this time period, at 1 o'clock, Mom has fed her little one and sent him walking back to school. Exactly. I grew up in Athens. I grew up about a block from an upper village school. Every morning, got up, walked that block to school. 9 o'clock, Mr. Johnson rang the bell. This is a 3-room schoolhouse. Miss Rainey has kindergarten first. Miss Slider has 2nd and 3rd. Mr. Johnson has 4th, 5th, and 6th. 3 classrooms. A bathroom for the girls, a bathroom for the boys, and a library, and that's it. Nothing else. No gym, no cafeteria, no nothing. And by the way, the library, I never ever saw anybody go in, read a book in there, check out a book, anything. Nothing. The only thing the library was used was for Mr. Johnson to paddle miscreant boys. And yours truly may have led the pack. I got more spankings in there. I just couldn't keep my mouth shut. So at any rate, that was it. So at noon, Mr. Johnson rang the bell again. You walked home for lunch. I would listen to WGY, hearing about our Sabre jets shooting down the MiGs in Korea, loving it, blah, blah. Then back to school. 1 o'clock, Mr. Johnson rings the bell. 3 o'clock, Mr. Johnson rings the bell again, and we walked home. That was the day. So, the network says, okay, 1 o'clock, the kids are going back to school. Now Mom might be able to sit down for half hour, and go ahead and listen to her favorite soap opera. The very first soap opera in history is broadcast in 1930 over radio station WGN out of Chicago. The name of that soap opera was Clara, Lou, L-U, and M-E-M. Clara, Lou, and M. Long gone, long forgotten, very obscure. By the way, WGN, Chicago, was owned by the Chicago Tribune newspaper. So here's what WGN stood for. World's Greatest Newspaper. There was another station, oh, by the way, GN is still on the air, and there's another station in Chicago, WLS, notice 3-letter. WLS was owned by Sears and Roebuck. So here's what WLS stood for. World's Largest Store. Okay, but after that first one, it explodes. Can anybody name some of the soap operas? Can anybody remember any of them? I first thought Ma Perkins. How about
Dallas?
Stella Dallas?
Like later on, the Edge of Night.
Edge of Night? Yep, any of these. Days of Our Lives. I love this one. Just Plain Bill.
Search for tomorrow. Search for tomorrow.
Search for Tomorrow. How about, ready for this one, John's Other Wife? Not nearly as salacious as it sounds. There was no salaciousness on radio. But I'm going to tell me if you think I'm wrong. I think probably the soap opera, the seminal soap opera just had to be The Guiding Light.
Light.
Oh, yeah.
My mother never missed it, never missed it. So, again, depending on the market, the soap opera segment ends 3:30, 4 o'clock. And then comes the after-school segment, or what the networks called the juvenile segment, or what we would call the kiddie segment. This could be, again, depending on the market, somewhere between 4 and 6 in the afternoon. It could be 5 to 6, could be 4:30, 6, again, depending on the market, but after school. The network's rationale for this one is, okay, the kids are back to home now, and it's not time for supper yet. And now maybe they've got a little time to listen to their favorite shows. A little, would you call this demographics? Tell me what you think. I'm talking 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, 50s. Folks, think about it. Predominantly, the population of the United States is in the Northeast, the North. I mean, before air conditioning, I used to talk to older folks when I was young that lived in the South. Those folks would tell me, I remember one couple from Mississippi on the train saying to me, oh my word, in the days before air conditioning, summer was unbearable. It was unbearable, So, we're talking, in other words, think of it this way, probably a good 6 months of the year, those kids are going to be indoors. They're going to be listening to the radio. So, what were most of these kiddie shows sponsored by? They just had to be cereals. Cereals. I mean, they were just every cereal you can imagine. The one exception was Captain Midnight. Anybody remember what Captain Midnight was sponsored by?
Is that Ovaltine?
Ovaltine. Oh my goodness! And I hope up in sky heaven, Captain Midnight looks down at me every night and smiles. Well, you can ask my wife. To this day, every night I have 3 scoops of Ovaltine in my grandpa's classic chocolate milk drink that I make, right? But mostly it would be cereals. Okay? Does anybody possibly remember the names of any of the shows in the kiddie segment? It would be, I can hold up a couple, see if I can help out a little bit here. Comics and it's Ralston Straight Shooters. Okay.
Hopalong Cassidy.
Yeah, Hopalong Cassidy.
Rin Tin
Tin
Tin.
Tin Tin.
Baby Snooks.
Lassie. Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. Little Orphan Annie, Smiling Jack, Terry and the Pirates. Oh, here's Hoppy. Thought I had it. Hoppy. And here he is.
Superman. Created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster back when they were teenagers and during the Great Depression.
And comic book number 1, he's holding the car in the air, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
How much is that comic book worth? A fortune, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, now, folks, most of these cereals would have some kind of a premium offering. And it worked 2 ways. One way was you cut off the box top and you sent in 3 box tops and 10 cents for your secret decoder badge, or your secret decoder ring, or whatever, a lot of secret decoder stuffs. And then when you got it, you understand now, when you got it, it was only me and Captain Midnight that knew. Is that right? I mean, nobody else in the world, it's just me. Okay, Captain, I got this. We're gonna get those spies, whatever, maybe. But it was just great stuff. Or there were times when the premium was right in the box. You bought the darn box to get the premium. One of my all-time favorite cereal, Kellogg's Pep. I'm still lamenting the day that they discontinued making Kellogg's. Ask my wife. She hears this all the while. Why did they stop making Kellogg's Pep? She has to hear this all the while. And the other one they stopped making was Tom Mix's cereal, Ralston Purina. It was called Shredded Ralston. It was a delicious hot cereal. Okay? But at any rate, the Tom Mix Shredded Ralston Premium is arguably one of the most famous and one of the best. And it was the Whistling Sheriff's Badge.
Wow.
Yeah, you sent in for this, and when you got it, you put your badge on, we all strapped on our 6 guns, right? Isn't that amazing? We all grew up, none could be gangs, so we lived. Today, don't even dare point your finger like that in school now, they arrest you. But we put on our 6 guns, and we put on our badge, and we made believe we were chasing the bad guys. And maybe there was too many bad guys for us. So now, what you did was, no joke, you took the badge off, you turned it over, and it's a whistle, and you whistle, wee, wee, wee. You whistle, and who comes galloping up on his great horse, Tony, but Tom Mix to help you get those bad guys. That was another thing about radio. Imagination. You had to imagine, you had to think. So that leads us then to the third of the segments. This one is roughly 6:30-ish to 8 o'clock. It's probably the shortest segment. And this one was easily the most difficult of the segments for the networks of the 4. This was called the mixed audience segment. Here's the rationale. The network said, well, supper's over, and the kids aren't going to go to bed until about 8 o'clock in most cases. So we need to come up with a program, get this, that will meet both the child and the adult's needs. How tough is that? You've got to get something that's not over the head of the kid, but not too simple or too dull for the adult. And brother, that was no easy chore, and I'm here to tell you that the mixed audience segment, it's called the after supper segment, folks, it was a graveyard for shows. Shows just came and died. Came there to die, Having said that, in that segment will reside the most successful dramatic radio show in history. It was on every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday night. I heard it in Athens on WXKW out of Albany, Longboat, an ABC affiliate. From 7:30 to 8 o'clock, I took my chair, I had the radio set right there in the kitchen, and I turned it this way so I would be like riding a horse. And I sat there nice and close to the radio, and I listened to every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Anybody know the name? Are you ready? The Lone Ranger. The most successful dramatic radio show in history. It lasted, you ready for this? 22 consecutive years.
That's a long time.
Yeah, and I have down here, I even noted it down, there were 2,956 original broadcasts. We're close to 3,000 original. No dramatic radio show in history comes close.
Whoa, amazing.
And it was. And we have them, Arlene and I, we have a nice big collection of radio shows. We buy them from an outfit called Radio Spirits. And we send in, and for Christmas or my birthday, she'll give me another, the Green Hornet or the Gunsmoke, whatever. And we have a nice collection. And I, as an adult, listening to the Lone Ranger, I'll say to her, darn, these hold up. These hold up pretty good. I can see, they may not be quite as elaborate as some of the best, the nighttime productions, but pretty darn good. And I could see why they held on. So the Hooper, remember I said about Hooper, the Hooper rating company? They found year in and year out, the Lone Ranger's audience was right down the middle, 50% adult, 50% child. So whatever the producers of the Lone Ranger did, they had it right. It worked. Well, that then brings us to the final of the 4 segments. And that would be the adult segment. From 8 o'clock till, again, depending on the market, 8 to 10, 10:30 or 11. Now, the adult market, I see some people smiling because they know what I'm going to say. It didn't mean then what it means now. Right? Right. I mean, how far do I have to go on this? Let me put it this way. Tell me if you disagree. I don't think, unless it was an accident, there was ever a cuss word on radio. There were a few accidents. Anybody ever had access to the Pardon My Blooper records? If you haven't, Google it or get Pardon My Blooper. This guy back in the 30s, 40s, his hobby was phonographing, or he would record radio shows all over America. And he picked up the bloopers. So many, and like, it's usually when an announcer was in a rush. And there's a religious program on a Sunday morning, and you can hear the announcer, and thank you, Pastor so-and-so, for that sermon. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the National Broadcasting Corporation. Next week's topic is Cast I Broad Upon the Waters. I mean, these were bloopers. He didn't mean to say it that way. But you would never, a child could listen to those so-called adult shows at night, and there would be nothing that mom and dad had to worry about. And when there were so-called adult situations, they were handled in a way that, number one, the kid probably would never understand. And when they were, okay, so you had your crime shows. And every once in a while on the crime show, the wife is cheating on the husband. And, well, hang on. The thrust here isn't so much, there's very little coverage of the cheating. The thrust is usually how the boyfriend and the wife are going to bump off the husband. Or if they do bump off the husband, the detective needs, how's he solve it? You follow me? That's the thrust, not the sexual part of it. The thrust is solving the crime or that sort of thing. Really, there was nothing that kids could hear at night that would be offensive. But basically, it was aimed at the adults. What do you guess might be the #1 type of show and the adult segment?
Variety?
It's a good guess. I would have guessed that too. It would actually be...
Music, wasn't it?
Now I would have guessed that one too.
Or news.
News.
Game.
I'm sorry?
Game.
Gaming. All of these are really good guesses. Comedies.
Comedy.
Yeah.
Comedies. They just, everything you folks said, they had good ratings, but the comedies just were pervasive. I mean, the comedies were on all 4 networks, and you had tremendous comedians in those days, and they were all clean. Imagine that. I mean, their jokes were funny and they were clean. And radio had a mine of resource. They mined this resource, and it was called vaudeville. Remember vaudeville? Vaudeville, and particularly in the days before TV and radio, it was a circuit all over the country, right? And this would be like 2 hours of entertainment. And you went to this theater, and it would be a series of unrelated acts. On comes a comedian, then a musician, then a singer, then a magician, then an acrobat, then another comedian. And this just went on for 2 hours of pure entertainment. So vaudeville was loaded with comedians. Well, radio, they shamelessly raided vaudeville and took their best comedians. So you had people like Red Skelton. Remember Red Skelton? Here it is right here. Red
My
Skelton.
dad does.
You like Red Skelton?
Oh, my dad does.
He likes the comedians.
Yeah.
Anybody remember George Burns and Gracie Allen?
Oh, yeah.
Bob Hope, Martin and Lewis. Does anybody have a favorite? Can I tell you who I think was the greatest comedian? Who would you like?
Fanny Bryce.
Who?
Fanny Bryce.
Fanny Bryce was great.
Who would forget the Three Stooges?
Three Stooges, yeah. Anybody? I'm thinking of Jack Benny. What do you think, Jack Benny? And Jack Benny. I mean, they played this up. They had this bit that he was a tightwad. That he was so cheap. In real life, he was a very warm, generous, and giving man. But on radio, they played him up. He drove a 1929 Maxwell. He worried about every nickel. His Mary Livingston, who was his real-life wife, would always be teasing him about how cheap he was. Did you know, she was really excellent. Did you know she had mic fright? That they had to really work on her. She was afraid of the microphone. Isn't that amazing? You wouldn't know it, but she was. The most famous comic skit in radio history is when Jack Benny is walking down the streets of New York City, and a robber jumps out of the alley, and he announces, "Mister, I've got a gun, and it's your money or your life." In silence. We hear nothing. And the robber, after a while, goes, "I said, it's your money or your life." And Jack Benny goes, I'm thinking. But there were so many of the great comedians. There were a lot of other kinds of shows on the air. There were these anthology shows, horror shows like Lights Out, this CBS radio theater. There were these kind of shows, the CBS Playhouse, Lux radio.
Yeah.
They would take scripts of Hollywood movies and make radio plays out of them. There were numerous crime shows, starting with The Shadow, The Green Hornet, Sam Spade, Boston Blackie, Green Hornet. How about this guy? Anybody remember? Dragnet. What did he say? What was his famous saying? Just the facts, man. Just the facts, man. And by the way, in real life, he was quite the ladies' man. On radio, on TV, very stern, but they said in real life, he was a real ladies' man. But he started on TV and then leaped to radio. Or I'm sorry, wrong way. But I got something for you later on. He starts on radio and goes to TV. There were westerns galore, and this would be Jimmy Stewart. He starred in a western called The Six Shooter. High quality show, but it wasn't on very long. Gene Autry in Melody Ranch, Roy Rogers Show, a number of them, and here would be Gunsmoke. This is William Conrad. And folks, radio historians have suggested that Gunsmoke was the finest radio drama on radio, bar none. Western or not. It was so well produced that many historians say this was the best dramatic show on radio. And then it flipped to television in 1955 with James Arness, 6'6", built, nice guy. I mean, really, poor William Conrad. He was heartbroken. But he was kind of, at this point, middle-aged. He was a little overweight. He just wouldn't fit the bill. But he did get to star in a TV show called Cannon, and then later on in a show called Jake and the Fat Man. And he was tremendous actor. No discussion of radio history would be complete without the discussion of Orson Welles and the War of the Worlds. Halloween Eve, 1938, the Mercury Theater of the Air on CBS. He does it as though it's a news broadcast. And he's got the Martians landing at Grover's Mill, New Jersey. And half of the American public bought it. They went nuts. Some people were ready to jump off cliffs. I mean, it was serious. Now, I finally got the TV movie. I remember seeing it in the 70s. There's a TV movie, you can get it. I bought mine on Amazon, I guess. And it's called The Night That Panicked America. The Night That Panicked America. But every Halloween we usually watch it. And it's pretty accurate, you know. And then, of course, in the end, as that show ends, you can hear this indistinct sound in the background, and it grows gradually louder, and it goes. That, unfortunately, was a false horror that the public didn't need to worry about. And then the sound in the back gets louder, louder. Unfortunately for the American public, there was a real horror that they will be worrying about very soon, and then you hear Hitler's voice. And that's the end of the movie. You know, unfortunately, there was going to be a real horror. You know, not that one. Well, at any rate, how popular was radio in the golden age? 1947, the Hooper Company, normally doing just individual ratings, decides to find out how popular was radio. Now, 1947 is late in the game. It's late. Radio's still paramount, but you could see TV on the horizon. You could see it was coming. But it's still, radio's still dominant. In 1947, when Hooper did this survey, they found that 82 out of every 100 Americans was a regular radio listener. That's how dominant radio was at that time. And I thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Oh, I forgot. Could I play you 30 seconds from another show? Okay. I always forget this.
Be my guest.
Let's. I wonder how many people will remember this one.
Yeah, it's okay. We don't mind. We all make mistakes. All we can do is learn from them.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadows.
That
Once
wasn't
again, your
Orson
neighborhood
Welles.
blue coal dealer brings you the thrilling adventures of the Shadow, the hard and relentless fight of one man against the forces of evil. These dramatizations are designed to demonstrate forcibly to old and young alike that crime does not pay.
That wasn't Orson Welles. On the earlier broadcast, that was Orson Welles. He was the early Shadow, Orson Welles. Yeah, and then there was a succession of them. I don't know if there are any questions, any comments? Yeah.
The call letters, we live in West Virginia, WWVA.
Yes.
They had a strong signal. We used to have to listen to that station going to college in Fort Wayne, Indiana, because you didn't have to fiddle with the radio to find a new station, because you could listen for a long distance.
There's another famous station in Fort Wayne, WOWO. They call it WOWO.
Yep.
Yeah, very powerful. Yeah. Okay. Were there, any other comments at all?
I think the morning shows that when Forrest Willis
Yes.
used to play the march off to school
Yes.
at 10 of 9.
Okay.
Do you remember that?
You know what I remember is the Chanticleer on WGY. Anybody remember Chanticleer and Earl Pudney?
Earl Pudney.
Yeah, that on GY. And then Earl Pudney went over to TV.
Yeah.
Piano. He went over to... WRGB was originally owned by WGY. Or General Electric. Same thing. Yeah. Oops. See, this is why I didn't stand behind the podium. That's why I got spanked for a while in school.
Which proves my point why, like with accidents, mistakes happen. All we can do is learn from them.
That's for sure. Very good point. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it.